And welcome back to Comment Commentary, the show where I look at comments that I get and I provide commentary. I'm Hardleg Joe, if ya didn't know, and today's comment comes from Picky Physics Student 201, who wrote quite a bit in response to the last episode. Some of it a little insightful, a lot of it not so much. But there's one part in particular that I really want to focus in on. This part I've highlighted up here, which says, capitalism is a made-up term. It boils down to property rights and the free trade thereof. Which is quite the statement there. I'm really tempted to just go in hard and dunk on the semantics here because what do you mean it's a made-up term? All terms are made up. Like, that's where terms come from. People make them up. You know, maybe he's just trying to say that capitalism is like a buzzword that doesn't actually mean anything. But that's just, like, provably false, right? Like, there's 200 years of history of people studying and analyzing capitalism. Like, to say that it's a made-up term is just absolutely silly. But, you know, again, I'm not here to dunk on him. It's clearly poorly worded, but I kind of get what they're saying. And the reason I want to talk about this is because it highlights a problem that I often see. And not just in my comments, not just on social media in general, but even from, like, real-life politicians, people with power who should know better. And that problem is, people can't define capitalism. Not easily, not clearly. You know, a lot of them have a vague notion of what capitalism is. They know it involves, like, money. You know, this guy's got one word right. Property is certainly involved. But they seem to think it's this very nebulous thing, or they have an idea of it that's way broader than what capitalism actually is. Which is a big problem for someone like me who often criticizes capitalism. Because when I do, I'll get accused of all sorts of crazy shit. Well, there are people who are like, oh, you want to get rid of all cash and have a moneyless society? Or they'll be like, oh, you want all the governments to control business. You want a planned economy where you don't get to choose your brand of socks and the government decides your job. And like, no, I don't want any of those things. Those have nothing to do with capitalism. Capitalism is a very narrow term, and whenever I talk about it, I'm talking specifically about this idea. So, I wanted to do just a little public service announcement, you know, my little contribution to the discourse, which is the simple definition of capitalism for those who don't know. Bam! Capitalism is a system where businesses are treated as private property. That's it. That's the simple definition for capitalism. And it comes from the idea of capital, which in an economic sense is any kind of property you own that you use to make money. So for example, like a factory, that's probably the classic example of capital. A storefront can also be capital. A big enough farm can be capital. And if you own any of those things, then that makes you a capitalist. Which I'm willing to bet most of the people watching aren't capitalists. Or if you are, you're like me, where it's like, yeah, I own this room in my house that I use to record stuff in, but it's a very, very small amount of capital. You know, I have family members who are plumbers and electricians, and they may have a truck that they do business out of. Technically, those are capital, but it doesn't really compare to, like, Jeff Bezos owning all the Amazon warehouses. It doesn't compare to, like, Elon Musk owning the factory that makes the Teslas. You know, they are capital C capitalists. And capitalism is a system, a set of rules and laws, in this case enforced and created by the US government, which facilitates capitalism. It allows them to run their property however they want. I mean, within reason or whatever, like, you know, you can't sell someone poison and then market it as food. Or I guess you can, but, like, it has to kill them very slowly. You know, it can't be, like, instant poison. Or if it is, you might have to pay a fine or whatever. You know, we're getting off the trail because that's not even, like, the problem I have with capitalism. The reason that I criticize it so often is just because of this core idea. The fact that businesses are private property. And to understand why that's such a bad idea, I'd like to look at one of the alternatives. A system where businesses are treated as public property. Which is an idea that every time I bring it up to, like, Americans, they really don't understand it. I mean, I can't blame them. They've spent their entire life inundated with almost exclusively private businesses. They've never lived any other way. So this whole notion is kind of foreign to them. But the best example I can think of is to think about how your town is run. You know, your hometown isn't owned by anyone. It's not private property. It's public property. All the people who live there kind of contribute to it. You all elect leaders, like mayor, city council, who come up with the rules and regulations for your town. And you may be thinking, like, well, yeah, that's not like a business, though. That's a government. But really, those two things aren't that different. I mean, what is a business at the end of the day? It's transactional. You know, you're giving someone money, and they're giving you a good or a service in return. Well, your town collects money in the form of taxes. And in return, they give you goods in the form of infrastructure, you know, roads, bridges, public parks. Sometimes the sewer system, the electrical system is provided by the town. And they also provide services, you know, the firefighters, police to a certain extent, libraries. In very many ways, a town is just as transactional as any business. The only difference is, because they don't have owners, they don't really have to make a profit, right? Like, if a town takes in more tax money than it needs, and it doesn't spend that on the residents, then it's a shitty town. You know, that money doesn't do anything sitting in the treasury. At best, maybe it's like a rainy day fund in case of an emergency, but it's not really helping anyone. It's just kind of gathering dust. And the same thing, if a town takes in a whole bunch of tax money, and then the mayor or the city council takes a cut of that, that's corruption. That's not the town functioning as it should be. That's a bad thing. There's a reason that most towns try to balance the budget, to try to spend as much as they get in. Because there's no incentive to do otherwise. There's not really any reason to keep extra money. In fact, a lot of towns are so worried, so concerned with helping their residents, that they spend more than they get in and operate in a perpetual budget loss. And obviously there are some bad towns around America. You know, the people of Flint, Michigan are not really happy with how their town has been running things. But I'd like to think that the majority of you know, you don't even bother with local governments. The simple fact that towns don't have any benefit other than running the town, that you get to live in a good town, kind of ensures that they run pretty smoothly, regardless of how many people are paying attention. And I say all this because I'd like you to imagine if that wasn't the case. What if towns were private property? What if the person who founded your town 100 years ago owned it, and they could pass down that ownership to their kids or their grandkids? And every time you paid tax money, it got split in half. Half of it went towards the town, towards the infrastructure and the services, and the other half went into the pockets of the owners, or the owner's descendants. If we take this metaphor to its realistic conclusion, what would probably happen is the owner wouldn't be the sole owner of the town. They would split it up into a bunch of shares, 1,000 different pieces that all represent a small chunk of the town. And then they would sell those to other wealthy people, who would buy them up with the promise that, hey, if you own 10% of the town, then you get 10% of the tax revenue, 10% of the profits, rather, of the tax revenue. And that way people could buy up pieces of towns all over the country. Then it doesn't matter, like, if one town fails, if one goes under, as long as all the towns in general are trending upwards, you're gonna make some money off of that. And I mean, that's the whole point of making these private ownerships, to make money. Or specifically, to make a passive income. Because, I mean, the owner, and especially like their grandkids, the shareholders who bought in later, they don't live in your town. They don't work in your town. They don't add anything to it. They may not even have ever stepped foot in it. They might not even know that they own your specific town. But they still get a cut of your tax dollars. Every time you do something in that town, a little bit gets siphoned to them. And while I try not to use very emotionally charged language on this channel, I can't think of any other way to describe that relationship than parasitic. The owners are parasites. They offer nothing, they do no work, but they still get to suck a bunch of the money out of the system. And that's what capitalism is. Capitalism is treating businesses like that. People own them, which means they get a cut of the revenue even though they don't contribute anything. If you own a factory, you can pay people to run it for you. You can put other people's in charge and then just go take a vacation in Paris and let the money roll in. It's money for nothing. And a lot of people don't like that just on its own. Just on a moral level, the idea that people are getting stuff for free kind of irks them. Especially when it's the richest people in the society, the people who have the most money to buy up the shares. But that's not even the main problem with it. The main problem is that because we have capitalism, every single business in America is run horribly, woefully inefficiently. Because anytime you're buying something, you're not just paying for the parts and labor. A cut also has to be set aside to go to the owners. And all of this brings us back to our original comment. Yeah, we weren't just going here for the highlighted part. Because at the bottom, they talk about what guys actually want. If you missed the previous episode, we were talking about propaganda aimed at young men and why it was so effective. And this picky physics student says that the reason it is because it promises men what they want. And what they want is a job that pays them a decent wage and gives them enough free time and money to pursue their hobbies, to pursue relationships. They want to be able to raise a family on a single income like their grandparents could. And then he goes on to blame that on women looking at leftist TikToks. He blames it on politicians or politically minded people trying to get them to pay attention to the system when what they want to do is just work hard and get rewarded. And I see comments like this all the time that'll blame it on a dozen different stuff. Oh, you're not getting paid more because of immigrants, because of brown people, because of wokeness or whatever. And they don't seem to realize that the reason you're not getting paid a lot is because your job is owned by someone who wants to make as much money off of you as possible. The more work they can get you to do for the less amount of money, the more money they make. The more they can charge for a product, the more they make. So it is to their advantage to pay you as little as possible and charge as much as possible. So if what you're worried about is the high cost of living and the low wages and having to work long hours, then your beef is not with leftists or politics or gay people or immigrants. It's with capitalists. It's with the people who own the places that are selling you those things and paying you your wages. Because they are taking such a huge slice of the pie that it's cutting away from everyone else. And the solution is really simple. Because again, capitalism is a system. It's a series of laws and rules that are created and enforced by the government that we democratically control. If we use the government, if we get involved in politics, we can change those rules. We can change the system. Maybe not necessarily to overturn capitalism. I mean, that's certainly what I would like. I dream of a world where the workers control their own businesses, where they elect the leadership and there are no owners, where businesses are run like towns are for the sake of them. A hospital isn't a money machine for a rich shareholder. It's a place to heal people, and it doesn't have to make a profit. It just has to heal people so they can function in society. But we don't even have to go that far to fix things. We just need to rein in the power of capitalists. We need to make it so that there are limits on how much they can make, how much of a slice of the profit they can take, how much they can charge for goods, how much they can pay people. Laws and regulations can rein in all this stuff very easily and make it so that things are affordable, so that you have a living wage. So that's my spiel. That's what I had to say on it. And, you know, despite the fact that I disagree so wholeheartedly with a lot of what this person said, I want to thank them for commenting. I want to reinforce the fact that me and him aren't enemies. You know, at the end of the day, we're on the same side. We both want the same thing. We both want higher wages. We both want lower prices. We both want people to have the time and freedom to pursue what they want. Families, hobbies, whatever it is. We just disagree on what the source is. And I think it's obvious that the source is the people at the top with all the power, the people who control and own everything. And they seem to think it's women, for some reason. All women have collaborate. I'm sorry, I'm dunking on them again. But I hope that by doing that, by giving them a little bit of dunking, by sort of mocking them a little bit, maybe I can convince them they should reevaluate the way that they're thinking about this. And maybe I could convince some of you. I mean, that's why I make these videos, so I can hopefully reach out to people and do a little bit of education. So if you like that, if you learned something, if you thought this was interesting, like the video, comment, subscribe, you know, all that stuff. This is a small channel. I don't have any ads. I'm just trying to get the words out to whoever I can reach. So if you appreciate that, the more interaction, the better. And of course, if you disagree, if you have your own comments or questions about any of this, feel free to leave it down in the comments. And maybe next time you could appear on Comment Commentary. Until then, I've been Hardleg Joe, and until next time, stay safe out there.